Good morning, everyone. Bon dia, if you're in the Americas. Bon tard, good afternoon, if you're in Europe or Africa. Welcome back to the third day. I'm Greg Jenkins, Director of ASETA and co-host of the All Air Summit. We have an exciting day in store for all of you. So I hope you saw some of the plenary and great sessions from yesterday. And if you have not, they will be made available over time. So we start this morning with the plenary session on the UN Decade of Ocean Sciences for Sustainable Development for 2021 to 2130. This session will be moderated by Julian, and then we have 4 additional sessions on the mission of resilience to coastal natural hazards. So I hope you will join those. At the end of each session, we will have a potential 30-minute breakout room to keep the conversation going. So you will find a Zoom link if you want to join. And most importantly, I ask all of you to fill out the surveys at the end of each session. Now, it's not just whether it was a great session, because they're all going to be great sessions, but we have a call of action for you. We want to know if you want to engage in future actions. So please fill out the surveys. We really need those. We need them from all across the Atlantic. And with that, I'll hand it over to Julian. Have a great day and enjoy the sessions.
The next 10 years will be crucial for life on the planet as we know it. Climate change, food shortages, epidemics and disasters, economic crises and unemployment. The good news? We can rely on a powerful source of common solutions to overcome these challenges. Our one shared ocean. Set to become the world's 7th largest economy by 2030, our ocean regulates climate and provides food and livelihoods for over 3 billion people. But do we know all our ocean has to offer? Can we harness ocean solutions to achieve our global goals by 2030? The United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development brings together scientists, governments, business, philanthropists and NGOs to unlock the science we need for the future we want. Are you ready to join the movement? Find out more, www.oceandecade.org.
Hello, dear colleagues. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are on the margins of this beautiful Atlantic Ocean. Welcome to this session on the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And today we are going to discuss the engagement and the opportunities of engagement from the Atlantic region. So my name is Julian Barbière. I'm the head of marine policy at the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, which is the lead organization coordinating the decade, and also the coordinator of the UN Decade. I'm very happy to, of course, have this opportunity to share with you and to have really an exchange on how the decade can really help to accelerate ocean science to deliver solutions for sustainable development. And when we're talking about acceleration, we're talking about the whole value chain, the way we are organizing and conducting research, the way we are collecting data through observation systems, the way we are packaging this data to really deliver information where the users needs them the most. We need also to talk about the capacity development aspects. So for us, this decade offers a unique opportunity for diverse stakeholders to initiate the co-design of transformative actions and basically to contribute to the Ocean Decade challenges and achieve our vision and outcomes. Of course, over the last 3 years, we've been working intensively around the world, including in the Atlantic region, to really try to come up with a global vision of what this decade should deliver. The decade will effectively start on the 1st of January 2021, so we are now completing this phase, and we now have an implementation plan for this decade, which offers a way forward and a framework for designing and collectively implementing those solutions. But let me maybe highlight 3 or 4 principles which we feel are very important as we are moving towards the development of those actions. First, the concept of inclusivity. It's very important that this decade leaves no one behind. How do we really ensure that stakeholders have a capacity to develop, use and access science-based solutions for sustainable development? We need to pay attention to capacity development, of course, to ocean literacy, to gender issues, to engagement of early career professionals, and of course, the equitable access to data, technology, and information. Another important element of this decade is the concept of co-design and co-delivery for those actions and solutions. This really includes that the way the decade can work at the science policy and the science solutions interfaces, and how innovative partnerships, including with industry, can lead to a fulfillment of a decade. The concept of subsidiarity is also very important. We need to translate the global decade framework to regional and national action and priorities. And for that, we need those stakeholders engaged all along the implementation of the decade. And finally, the principle of partnership. We need partnerships across disciplines. We need partnerships across different types of ocean sectors, and of course, communities and stakeholders. So in a sense, I believe that this All-Atlantic Summit offers a beautiful platform for talking about the decade, because I understand this is really the underlying objective of this event. So we have 4 great speakers with us today who are going to highlight some of the dimensions I just mentioned. I just want to also remind you that we want this session to be as interactive as possible. So please do use the Q&A the chat box to raise any questions that you would like to pose to our panelists. And at the end of the presentations, we will hopefully have about 20 minutes to try to address these questions. So before we go into our panel, maybe one more word of welcome, and this is from our Executive Secretary of the IOC, Dr. Vladimir Ryabinin.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, the home of ocean science in the United Nations system, welcome to the Ocean Decade panel of the 6th High-Level Industry Science Government Dialogue on Atlantic Interactions. Above all, and first of all, thanks to the Air Center, to the Penn State and its Alliance for Education, Science, Engineering and Design with Africa. Well, the decade is going to be the largest campaign in the history of ocean sciences, ever. But it is not the size that matters, it is the impact. The desired impact will be on the ocean and also on the people. We would like to achieve clean, resilient, productive, healthy ocean. We would like to generate impactful science, leading to people's safety and well-being, to societies living in harmony with the ocean. So this is, of course, easy to understand. But, you know, for that we need some hard science. We need observations, data, information, policies, ability to manage the ocean, ability to manage the fisheries, to address climate change. So this requires design. And the implementation plan for the decade, which is now at the consideration of United Nations General Assembly in New York, outlines the science we need for the future we want, for the ocean we want. A call for actions is going to be issued very soon on the 15th of October, roughly a week from the time of your panel. So I urge you to have good discussions and come up with ideas that you could implement in the call for action. So for that, we need early career ocean professionals to engage in creating their future. We would like also to invite decision makers and professionals in the ocean sciences, in the management of the ocean, on both coasts of the Atlantic Ocean, to join forces and coming up with good ideas and programs for the decade. So it is important to understand the paradigm of the decade. It is very simple in a way. So the paradigm is that we need to generate the science based on design, on our understanding of what needs to be done. And this science has to help us to enable the integrated ocean management in all the aspects that of our joint forces, joint work with the ocean. So from science to integrated ocean management, from the science to the ocean we need, and from the ocean we need to the future we want. That's basically the simple idea. The idea is simple, but you know, there is hard work ahead of us. So I wish you great success in your deliberations. And thank you for your attention.
Great. Thank you very much, Vladimir. So with this word of introduction, now let's get into business and start our panel. Our first speaker is going to be my colleague, Alison Clausen, who is going to give us a bit of an overview of the decade, its vision, what it intends to achieve. Let me say a few words about Alison. Alison joined the IOC in 2009 and has more than 20 years of professional experience in program and project development in the area of marine conservation, marine policy, and climate change adaptation. She has worked in Madagascar for many years, including with the World Bank, also as a regional director with the Wildlife Conservation Society. And Alison is intensively engaged in the decade and working hard on developing the mechanisms of the decade, including the implementation plan, which we just finalized in the last couple of months. So let me ask Alison to give us this overview so that we all have a common understanding of what the decade aims to do. Alison.
Great, thanks, Julian. Okay, I've just worked out how to switch slides. So good morning, good afternoon to everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. Always thrilled to be able to talk to new and old colleagues about the Ocean Decade. I want to start with one slide that just gives a quick recap of the preparation phase of the Ocean Decade. So the proclamation of the decade was in December 2017 by the United Nations General Assembly. And at this time, IOC-UNESCO, as Julian mentioned, was nominated or mandated as the coordinating agency of the preparation phase of the decade. So this really has triggered over the last 2 or 3 years a massive engagement by IOC and our partners to bring together groups of people at the global level, at the regional level, around different themes, including early career ocean professionals. We have established and have been working with an executive planning group that has really provided high-level strategic advice on the whole preparation phase, and we're very honoured to have one of the members of that executive planning group talking to you today. So it's been a massive amount of work over the last 2 or 3 years to have a very participatory process, which has really culminated in the preparation of this famous implementation plan, which is going to be the focus of my discussion today. Now, the implementation plan has been through 2 major iterations already, 2 major peer review processes with the scientific community as well as with governments and UN agencies. And the result is version 2.0 of the draft implementation plan, which is what I'm going to present today. And I think the last line of text is cut off on this slide, unfortunately, but the key point to note here is that we have a very solid document, version 2.0 of the implementation plan, which has gone through all these peer review processes and which is now with the United Nations General Assembly for its consideration. So let's look together at exactly what this implementation plan is all about. The implementation plan really provides the strategic framework for the decade. It is not intended to be an overly prescriptive document. It's really something that is going to be dynamic and living and that will be able to evolve and adapt over the next 10 years. I think if nothing else, the last 6 to 8 months have shown us how necessary it is for the scientific community, for UN agencies, for everybody to be able to adapt to new conditions. And we expect in the next 10 years, other things are going to come up that will require the same level of evolution and refinement. And so the plan is structured so that it can change and be modified and optimized. It's basically divided into 3 parts. The first part, which I'll talk about in a minute, provides some of the rationale, the vision, the mission, and the desired outcomes of the decade. Part 2 is more about the framework of the decade, what the priorities are, some of the processes to achieve those priorities and thus contribute to the vision and the mission. And then part 3 is more about the nuts and bolts, some of the implementation mechanisms that will be very important to make sure we have an efficient way of rolling out the decade. So jumping straight in, the decade vision and mission. I think the vision is probably familiar to a lot of you or those who have had some exposure to the ocean decade. The science we need for the ocean we want. It is very much the UN decade of ocean science for sustainable development. And so this focus on ocean science is very clear from the vision onwards. The mission is also very important and something that we've spent a lot of time reflecting on. And there are 3 key points in this mission that I'd like to draw to your attention that I think really underpin the decade and join some of the principles that Julian mentioned as well. First of all, transformative ocean science. So we're not talking about a decade of ocean science business as usual. We're talking about transformative ocean science that goes above and beyond what we're already doing because of where it's being done, how it's being done, who's doing it, who's using it. That's very, very important. Secondly, science solutions for sustainable development. This is not about science to write another report or science for science sake. It is about science for solutions to help our policymakers, our managers, our NGOs, our national governments, our subnational governments really achieve the sustainable development goals and the other objectives of sustainable development. And finally, connecting people and our ocean. The decade is about humanity's relationship with the ocean. It's about understanding the human interactions, be they good or bad. It's about looking at ways to incite behavior change in terms of our relationship with our ocean, and looking at ways that we can embrace the full spectrum of cultural and ecological and social values of the ocean. So, simple question, how are we going to achieve this? How can we achieve the vision and the mission? Well, the implementation plan sets out a decade action framework, which tries to simplify the sort of the concept or the theory of change lying behind how the decade will get from action on the ground to the achievement of reaching sustainable development. And it's presented here. Now, I will go through each of these elements in a bit more detail, but this gives you an overview of the whole, if you like. So at the highest level, we have the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, regional and global policy frameworks. Obviously, the ultimate aim of the decade is to contribute to these policy frameworks. How are we going to achieve that? Well, we're going to achieve it by fulfilling 7 decade outcomes. Now, these outcomes really describe the ocean we want at the end of the decade in 2030. They describe the desired state of the ocean in 2030. But again, how do we achieve these outcomes? We have put in place this 3-level framework to help us get to those outcomes. So first of all, identifying the priorities, these ocean decade challenges, the most immediate and pressing needs of the decade. Now, these obviously will need to evolve and change throughout the next 10 years, but it's really an attempt for at this current moment to say, what are the 10 most important challenges that people need to come together and collectively work towards? The next layer down then is the objectives, and these objectives are really about the steps in the process to get from the ocean we have to the ocean we want. It's not, there are different forms and types of initiative and activities that need to be undertaken to make that shift. And so we have these series of objectives, which I'll come back to as well, that will help us organize the way things are undertaken during the decade. And then the actions, which are really the tangible on-the-ground initiatives and endeavors that will be carried out around the world by diverse range of decade stakeholders, different actors, different partners coming together to do things that contribute to the objectives, thus to meeting the priorities and the challenges, to the outcomes, and to the 2030 Agenda and the global and regional policy frameworks. So to try and make this a little bit more concrete, a little bit more tangible, let's look at each of those briefly. The decade outcomes, as I said, describe the ocean we want at the end of the decade. There are 7 outcomes. Some of these, such as a clean ocean or a healthy and resilient ocean, really relate to the characteristics of the ocean itself. Others relate really to our human interaction or relationship with the ocean, so an inspiring and engaging ocean or an accessible ocean. But these are the agreed set of outcomes that really aim to characterize the ocean we want at the end of the decade. To translate these outcomes to more tangible entry points for action then, we've identified these 10 Ocean Decade challenges. So these are, again, the most pressing priorities of the decade that will evolve over the next 10 years. There are 10 of these. The first 5 really relate to challenges around knowledge and solutions. So pollution, multiple stresses on ecosystems, food security, ocean economy, ocean climate nexus. The next 3 relate to some of the essential infrastructure needs for ocean science. So multi-hazard warning systems, ocean observations, data and digital representation of the ocean. And then the last 2 are more foundational or cross-cutting. One about capacity development and access to data, information, knowledge, and technology, which really aligns with the focus of the decade on least developed countries, small island developing states. And finally, identifying and overcoming barriers to behavior change and making a step change in humanity's relationship with the ocean. So these challenges provide entry points, and as I said, they allow or they facilitate stakeholders coming together and working together in collective action rather than in dispersed action. And we believe it's through having that collective action that we'll be able to achieve the outcomes and make the change that we need. The objectives and the actions then. Let's start with the objectives. So they're shown, these 3 objectives are shown in the lighter blue here. As I said, these are steps in the process to move from the ocean we have to the ocean we want. We need to identify the knowledge, we need to generate that knowledge, and then we need to use that knowledge. Now, it's not as black and white as that. They're obviously overlapping and interacting between themselves, but this is a way of organizing the steps in the value chain in that shift from the ocean we have to the ocean we want. It's important to have these different objectives because when the actions are being put in place, it helps us to organize the way the focus of different actions and identify where there may be gaps. For example, we might see that over the first 3 or 4 years, there's a lot of attention on identifying and generating the required knowledge for sustainable development, but less focus on using that ocean knowledge for sustainable development solutions. And so we'll be able to adjust and refine as we go to make sure that that full process, that full value chain is being addressed by the decade. The decade actions then, which sit at the bottom, which are arguably the most important part of all of this, are the programs, the projects, the activities, the contributions of resources or financial contributions that will be carried out. They will be identified, they will be implemented, and they will be resourced by a diverse range of actors over the life of the decade. The implementation plan does not identify what these actions are. They will be identified through a process of calls for decade actions, and the first of those calls is actually coming up next week, and Julian will talk a little bit more about that at the end of towards the end of the session. But the idea is that proponents are identifying these actions. There's a set of endorsement criteria that will be used to analyze them, and then they will become formally part of the decade to contribute to the objectives, the challenges, to the outcomes, and thus to the 2030 agenda. But all this is only going to happen if there's very strong stakeholder engagement. And this needs to be engagement across geographies, across generations, across genders, across language groups. The decade will put in place structures and mechanisms so that a stakeholder ecosystem can emerge throughout the decade. There will be different types of stakeholder engagement networks that are encouraged and supported, although they will be voluntary and they will be self-organizing. Some of these are the national decade committees that are already starting to emerge, regional stakeholder platforms, decade implementing partners, which are more around the partners who are actually carrying out the actions, and the Ocean Decade Alliance, which is a very specific mechanism related to resource mobilization, which I will come back to in a later slide. All these groups will come together and form part of a global stakeholder forum. Now, this global stakeholder forum will be a mixture of online interaction as well as a hybrid virtual in-person regional and international conference series, and it really is going to facilitate collaboration and exchange at 3 levels. First of all, between the stakeholder groups and the decade coordination structures, so that there is a very close interface between those coordinating the decade and those contributing actions and resources and so on. Secondly, within the groups themselves, so providing space, for example, for early career ocean professionals to have a space within the forum where they can be talking and interacting. And thirdly, across groups. So national decade committees can be talking to regional platforms, or communities of practice around data can be talking to resource mobilization partners within the Ocean Decade Alliance. So it's really a matrix of interactions and exchanges and collaborations, which is going to be actively facilitated through this global stakeholder forum. The decade will need coordination. As you can see, there are many, many moving pieces, many moving parts. The approach we have tried to take is a simple and agile approach that, where possible, builds on existing structures and processes. I think the part in green here is probably some of the most interesting parts for this discussion. A decade coordination unit, which will be really the global coordination hub, if you like, which will sit within the IOC Secretariat. And this we're very, very closely working with and supported by a network of decentralized coordination structures. These are not yet fully identified because we're looking for partners to offer to host these, but they can be regional coordination centers, programmatic coordination centers. They can be hosted by governments, by research institutes, by universities, by NGOs, and either within existing or new structures. So they're really going to be a very important part of the decade to make sure that all the global priorities can be translated to the regional and to the national and subnational levels. A decade advisory board will be set up next year, which will provide strategic advice and recommendations on the running of the decade. Resource mobilization, obviously very important. It's one of the big questions we get. How will the decade help me find funding for my work? It's really important to point out that the decade is not a funding mechanism. It's not one pot of money which is going to be doled out to different partners. It really aims to set up a process whereby it is attractive for resource providers to align their strategies with the priorities of the decade, and that the decade coordination unit that I mentioned in the previous slide can play an active role in connecting the available resources to the needs of partners who are identifying decade actions. The Ocean Decade Alliance is a key part of this. This is a network of large-scale resource mobilization partners, so governments, UN agencies, philanthropic foundations, private sector, who are coming together and engaging their own resources to the decade, but also acting as a catalyst to have a multiplier effect for resource mobilization more broadly throughout the decade. So again, that we can go beyond business as usual in terms of ocean science resources and the availability of resources. With the second to last slide, I'd like to talk about how we're going to measure progress. And this comes back to one of my first slides about the fact that the implementation plan in the decade itself needs to evolve, adapt, and change over the life of the decade. So the implementation plan sets out a series of review processes whereby monitoring of operational indicators, as well as impact indicators and outcome indicators, will really be used to take stock every 2 or 3 years to make sure that we're still on the right track, to see where the gaps are, to see where additional resources are needed, to see where specific calls for decade actions may need to be targeted, to see other ways that the challenges may need to be changed, for example, to address emerging priorities. And we're just setting up now a monitoring and evaluation working group that is going to be developing a detailed monitoring and evaluation framework that will be presented to the Decade Advisory Board early in 2021. So to finish off, just to give you a taste of some of the things that are coming up, it's a very busy time with the implementation plan now with the United Nations General Assembly. The consideration of the implementation plan by the General Assembly will happen through to the end of the year. We're also gearing up for other operational pieces of the decade. So the big one is the launch of the first call for decade actions, which will start next week and be open till January 2021. And Julian will talk a little bit about that before the end of the session. We have a virtual high-level supporters event in early December, which will also be a pre-launch of the Ocean Decade Alliance that I mentioned. So stay tuned for more information on that. The decade starts obviously on the 1st of January. Through the first months of next year, we'll be progressively rolling out both the coordination structures and the global stakeholder forum that I mentioned. in the first quarter of next year, there'll be the first decisions on the endorsed decade actions through this first call for decade actions, because we need to wait until the governance structures are in place before we can make those decisions, but we will prioritize that for next year. And then there are two major events coming up next year. First of all, in Berlin, the first International Ocean Decade Conference, end of May to the beginning of June, and then the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon, for which there's not a date confirmed as yet, but which we understand is still going to be happening in 2021. So both these events, as well as many others I'm sure that will come up, but in particular these two events will really be very important international launch pads for the decade in 2021, and a chance for all of us to come together and really celebrate the start of this this amazing adventure that we're embarking on over the next 10 years. So I think I'll leave it there, hand it back to Julian, and I look forward to answering your questions in the session at the end of the panel today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alison. I hope this presentation provides a good overview and understanding of what the decade aims to achieve, but maybe even more importantly, where you as stakeholder, either if you are representing industry, governments, academia, how you can really engage and propose actions in this high-level framework that the decade offers. Our next speaker is going to be Dr. Christa von Hillebrandt-Andrade. Let me just introduce Christa. Christa is the manager of a Caribbean tsunami warning program of NOAA's National Weather Services, based in Puerto Rico. And of course, Christa work focuses mainly on earthquake and tsunami hazards, warning systems, and readiness. And she's also very engaged in scientific conferences, capacity building, community outreach, and media. And as Alison has mentioned, Christa has been part of this executive planning group, which really helped us define and organize this consultation process over 3 years, which ultimately ended in the implementation plan. So we're very grateful to all her contributions, and she continues, of course, to play an active role in supporting the rolling out of the decade. So Christa is going to talk about the societal impact of the ocean decade. We've heard earlier that what the decade aims to do in terms of transforming how ocean science is going to be delivered. But of course, we want this science to also make a change at the societal level. And I think this is very important that we try to set up those processes as well in order to reach the impact that we want to have by 2030. So Christa, over to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, saludos and buenos dias. Good day to everybody. And thank you for the opportunity to share a few words as a member of the Executive Planning Group of the UN Decade. To all the participants and speakers of this decade event on opportunities for Atlantic engagement, we really appreciate you taking the time to attend this event and being part of the ocean science revolution. To the IOC, the Air Center in Penn State, and its Alliance for Education, Science, Engineering, and Design with Africa, thank you for bringing us all together, at least virtually. I don't remember a life without ocean. Growing up and through today, swimming, body surfing, walking the beaches, eating seafood, watching sunsets over the horizon, sailing, boating, and cruising have been part of most of my life, whether here in the archipelago of Puerto Rico, where I grew up and live, or along the Pacific coast of Ecuador, my second home. With a career focused on tsunamis, the ocean has also become my livelihood and continues as my passion. So maybe you can imagine how excited I am to be part of the decade and its necessary revolution. There is no doubt in my mind, or most that have been involved in this process, that the Decade of Ocean Science was proclaimed by the UN because of its relevance to society. Its direct link to the societal development goals. While we're all excited about the science, many more, and even more, are excited about its societal impacts. So I know Alison reviewed quickly the outcomes that we placed for the decade, but I would like to highlight again, and it's maybe as you hear about them for the second time, 10th time, or maybe there's somebody that's just heard them dozens of times, hopefully you'll be inspired to taking action and making maybe a tweak in the action you are designing or already conducting. So a clean ocean. A clean ocean means clean water, the focus of SDG, the Societal Development 6. The water is the foundation of our life and our livelihoods, especially in the SIDS of the Caribbean and the Western Tropical Atlantic. Our economies depend on a clean ocean. No one wants to live, visit, or eat the seafood from a place that is not clean. We are betting on a co-designed, co-produced, co-delivered tools and services for a healthy and resilient ocean, the second outcome, which build resilience, recognize thresholds, and avoid the ecological tipping points for the health and well-being of society and the planet as a whole. This is what SDG 3 is all about, our health, which is much more than the absence of sickness. Moving on, more relevant and integrated understanding and as accurate as possible prediction of ocean ecosystems and their responses and interactions for a dynamic and adaptive ocean management is sought within this outcome of a predicted ocean. At the heart of SDG 14, life underwater, and will spur quality education, science, engineering, and technology. The next slide. A safe ocean seeks the protection of life and livelihoods. And I emphasize here life. When we first started, we talked about lives. And people said it's more just about human beings. It's about life. It's an entirety. And of course, the livelihoods from ocean-related hazards at the coast, but also at sea. And it spans geophysical and anthropogenic hazards from real-time or near real-time through decadal scales. Coming from an island or an archipelago that has been impacted over the past 3 years by more disasters than we would have thought we would ever experience even in our whole lifetime. It included even the sinking of the cargo ship El Faro, loaded with personal and commercial goods headed for the island. Deep inside, we know the importance of the UNDRR's Sendai platform for disaster risk reduction. Within our global tsunami warning community, we are super excited about the possibility of using submarine communication cables to detect, forecast, and follow tsunamis across the whole ocean, which will represent a vast improvement from just the couple of dozen of darts we currently have for this purpose. But not only that, we are just as excited, or even more excited, about our goal that every coastal community is ready for a tsunami, and thus supporting SDG 11, sustainable and thriving communities. The provision of a food supply and alternative livelihoods is secured in a sustainable and productive ocean. You heard this in the video. 3 billion people depend on the ocean for their life, their food, their protein, their livelihoods. There is no way we can reach SDG 2, zero hunger, without a sustainable and productive ocean. Quality controlled and relevant, I can't emphasize this enough, relevant ocean knowledge available to scientists, governments, educators, business and industry, and the public through accessible products is addressed in a transparent and accessible ocean. Most of us probably know it is not about the data available. We are here today, we are in the situation we are today because we have not been successful in providing the relevant ocean knowledge for policymakers to make the right calls, and more importantly, for society to advocate for those right calls. Next slide. Through the decade, we seek to highlight the ocean as a place of wonder and inspiration, thus also influencing the next generation of scientists, our current early career ocean professionals, policymakers, government officials, managers, and innovators. The inspiring and engaging ocean outcome was added on as a result of the global and regional meetings. We did not think of this originally within our EPG or in the work leading up to this, to the current implementation plan, but it acknowledges the need to change our attitudes, which Alison mentioned. We need to be inspired, whether it's through facts, pictures, paintings, dance, song, technology, or science. But for all, but particularly for the SIDS and LDCs, just as important it is to address the outcomes and challenges individually, it will be more important and make our actions sustainable if we address them in a holistical fashion, if we work together across our fields of expertise and sectors to find convergent and joint solutions. As Julian noted, this needs to be done within a framework of inclusiveness, respect, fairness, scientific integrity, and that no one is left behind. Everyone should be able to contribute and benefit from ocean science, including the small island developing states, the least developed countries, and we can't leave out our landlocked developing countries. When the EPG first gathered, in the next slide, together in Paris in December 2018, which seems light years away, and lifestyles, to discuss the decade and the implementation plan, we quickly agreed and acknowledged that while there still remains gaps in ocean science, understanding and data, the current state of knowledge should have been enough to stop the accelerated decline in ocean health, productivity, and safety. If we wanted to obtain different results, we were going to have to try different approaches. Because paraphrasing Albert Einstein, we were not going to be able to expect different results if we kept doing the same thing over and over again. It would just be insane. Therefore, central to the decade implementation plan is the notion of transformation. Action needs to be taken to get from where we are, the ocean we have, to where we want to be, the ocean we want, and that sustainable society that we all dream of. Our current state of science is largely competent for problem diagnostic. To get to the ocean we want, science needs to also provide solutions and motivate and inspire actions. Our current observation system for climate and emerging data service needs to be transformed to an ocean data system for understanding the past, documenting the present, and predicting our future. Major knowledge gaps, weak ocean literacy among stakeholders have gotten us to where we are today. And an ocean literate society making well-informed decisions will take us to where we want to be. Funding base for science is now mostly in research mode. And Alison said very clearly, the ocean decade does not offer a pot of money. That's something that we have to look for. And the way we're going to get those funds that we need to do the science to get the ocean we want, we need to clearly define that clear value chain can lead us to resourcing and the commitments that are ocean science. And we recognize, I mean, here we are focusing, and our participants leading up after following me will be from Africa, me from the Western Tropical Atlantic, the SID, Central America. We recognize hugely uneven capacity and the transfer of technology based on existing skills and knowledge. No one should be left behind. We should all be empowered to get where we would like to be. And on my final slide, I will talk about, I'd like to address this transformational approach to get to those societal outcomes. There is a consensus that if the advances of ocean science are going to support societal development goals, the use and uptake of scientific data knowledge by the end users, including but not limited to local, national, regional, and global policymakers and decision makers, non-governmental organizations, industry and private sector, and communities at large, requires a transformational approach. During the decade, both in terms of action and outcome, we need to move from beyond business as usual to a true revolution in ocean science. The transformative nature of the decade promotes and facilitates an ocean science that uses the 2030 agenda, not just SDG 14. It includes an ocean science that spans across disciplines and actively integrates natural and social sciences as well as the humanities. Ocean science that embraces local and indigenous knowledge as a key knowledge system. A science that communicates in forms that is widely understood across society that triggers behavioral change. A science that is shared openly and available for use. And an ocean science that strives for generational, especially our early career ocean professionals, gender and geographic diversity and inclusion in all its manifestations. And last but not least on this incomplete list is a science that is co-designed and co-delivered in a multi-stakeholder environment to be relevant and responsive across the value chain. For many of us, the terms of concept of co-design, co-construction, co-production, co-delivery may be new, but we invite you to participate in the UN Decade Global and Regional Virtue Sessions on focusing on this transformative approach. Given the devastating impact of COVID-19 on livelihoods across the globe, this transformation of the way we view and conduct ocean science is all the more relevant and imperative. I hope you're as ready as me to learn and implement with passion the concepts and tools we need for the ocean science revolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christa, for those this passionate plea, as always, for the decade, in particular, really underpinning what is at stake under each of those 7 societal outcomes. Clearly, the decade aims to reverse the decline of the ocean, but it's not the only goal. It's really about changing our relationship with the ocean, but also our relationship with as human beings and groups of human beings in the way we interact and organize this new paradigm of collaboration. So moving forward, you've mentioned, of course, the issue of uneven capacity in ocean science, and this is also demonstrated by the Global Ocean Science Report, which provides a kind of overview of where countries are in terms of scientific capacity, infrastructure. But of course, the case of Africa is something that we need to address, and the decade really needs to also provide an opportunity for strengthening the capacity to conduct science, but also to use science for decision-making and ocean management ultimately. So with us today, we have our colleague Mika Odido, who is the technical secretary for the IOC Subcommission for Africa and the adjacent island states. The role of this subcommission, which is part of IOC, is very much to promote regional and international cooperation on the understanding and management of the African oceans and coastal ecosystems. Mika has been working in this field of marine science research in coordination for more than 30 years, and of course started his career as a physical oceanographer with the Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute in Mombasa, Kenya. So over to you, Mika, if you could focus a little bit on what the decade aims to achieve for the continent and how you see the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. I'll start by briefly introducing the IOC Subcommission for Africa and the adjacent island states. Then after that, I will focus on the outcomes of the regional consultations on the UN Decade of on Ocean Science for Sustainable Development in Africa, and in particular, highlight some of the key issues that were identified and recommendations coming from the region. Next slide, please. IOC Africa was established in 2011 as a framework to facilitate coordination among member states in the region and to ensure efficient implementation of IOC programs in Africa. It's one of IOC's 3 subcommissions. The other 2 cover Western Pacific Westpac and Caribbean and adjacent region, that's IOCARIBE. IOC aims to promote scientific research and understanding of the ocean and coastal environment and resources, and provide science necessary for development of the blue economy in Africa, as outlined in key policy documents that have been prepared by the African Union, such as the Agenda 2063 on the Africa we want, and the 2050 African Integrated Maritime Strategy. Next slide, please. IOC Africa holds regular meetings to develop its programs. The last one was held in Nairobi in March 2019, and identified key activities that will be implemented over the next couple of years under 5 topics. That's ocean observations and monitoring, ocean sciences and assessments, ocean data and information management, capacity development for marine science and technology, governance, science policy, interface, and awareness. During the session in March 2029, the subcommission also recognized that the UN Decade of Ocean Sciences provides an opportunity to further develop marine sciences in the region, and emphasize the importance of a broad consultation to develop a regional decade program. As a follow-up to this, the subcommission supported the participation of experts from the region in several regional consultations. Next slide, please. This includes the one for South Atlantic, which was held in November 2019 in Rio, the one for Indian Ocean, which was held in Chennai, India in January this year, the one for Mediterranean Ocean, which was held in Italy in January this year, and finally, the subcommission organized itself a regional workshop here in Nairobi at the end of January 2020, which focused especially on identifying the key issues and recommending some of the action that needs to be taken to address the key issues during the decade. Next slide, please. I will now focus on the reporting on the regional workshop which was held here in Nairobi. We had more than 140 participants from 30 countries. It was organized in collaboration with UNEP, with the Western Indian Ocean Marine Science Association, GIZ, CODIO, and SCORE. We had 4 panel groups of experts discussing cross-cutting issues, that's setting a regional vision for the decade, innovative models to mobilize resources and create partnerships, capacity development, and communications and ocean literacy. Next slide, please. In addition, we had 6 working groups looking at what would be the key issues under each of the original 6 decade outcomes that have already been covered quite well by both Christa and Alison. Next slide, please. And each of these working groups identified at least 3 key issues that needs to be addressed during the decade for the region. For clean ocean, they identified marine litter and microplastics, oil spill, chemicals, eutrophication. For predictive ocean, they identified data and observation, access to data, quality and ownership, data collection, data analysis and interpretation. They also identified research and modeling and governance. For healthy ocean, they identified understanding and using knowledge about what constitutes a healthy and resilient marine ecosystem, mapping and continuous monitoring of the ocean ecosystem, understanding and managing the linkages between ecosystem services and the people, and developing the breadth of ocean governance approaches relevant and needed to ensure healthy and resilient ecosystems. Next slide, please. For safe ocean, they identified inadequate ocean management systems, physical alteration and destruction of habitat, inadequate marine security. For sustainably harvested and productive ocean, they identified unsustainable exploitation of resources, including IUU, climate variability and climate change effects on marine ecosystem, anthropogenic impacts and on marine ecosystem. And for the transparent and accessible ocean, they identified several issues related to data access, data sharing, data policies, and technical capacities to analyze and process the data. Next slide, please. I will now highlight 5 recommendations that came out of the workshop. These are part of a broader collection of recommendations, but this cover most of the specific areas that were really of concern to the region. The first one was harnessing the demographic dividend by empowering the huge pool of youthful population. More than 60% of Africa's population is below 30. the feeling was that the focus should be on getting them into ocean sciences through focused ocean literacy programs, supporting skills development and mentoring to enable them fit in the job market, and creating new opportunities for employment. Secondly, the workshop recommended that the decade should catalyze research in the fields listed and link the research results to societal applications. Thirdly, next slide, please. Was on improving the quality and quantity of research results. Scientists and institutions should think beyond producing publications to transforming lives through innovation and robust application of ocean sciences. The fourth one was on ocean research in the region should be strengthened through stronger integration of sciences, greater investment in ocean observing system, and improved science policy interface. New partnerships should be developed, supported by new ocean climate finance and improved ocean literacy and education to modify societal norms and behavior. And fifthly, the establishment of university-based ocean innovation incubator hubs supported by the private sector to serve as a conduit to transform research results to action via technological development that is adapted to regional and local contexts and led by African researchers. Next slide, please. I'd like to end by highlighting two key events that we'll have moving forward. On 3rd of November, we are planning a virtual workshop on regional co-design of solutions-oriented research, identification of priority issues, and recommendations for the elaboration of regional action plans. And then next year, we are planning a kickoff conference for the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development for Africa and the adjacent island states. The tentative date is February 2021, but this might change in view of the current sanitary situations. So I'll end there and hand back to Julian. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mika, for highlighting what has really come up as a number of recommendations in priority areas through the consultations that have been happening, including through this, for example, South Atlantic workshop that really brought African scientists and Latin American, South American stakeholders. I think it's great. Now we have the priority areas. We need to transform these into actions. And this is really the next step of the decade. So moving forward to our next speaker, I'm very happy to welcome Edward Senkondo, who is going to talk about the role of early career ocean professionals in the ocean decade. And we say professionals, so that really includes scientists, but not just scientists. And this is really where it's important that we really have a discussion with all the different fields that can really contribute to ocean sustainability. Let me highlight that Edward works with the Tanzania Fisheries Research Institute, where he's a research scientist. He has a BSc in Aquatic Environmental Sciences and Conservation, as well as an MSc in Marine Resource Management, and now he's doing a PhD with the National Institute of Oceanography in NOAA. Edward is a member and co-lead of the Informal Working Group of Early Career Ocean Professionals for the UN Ocean Decade, which is a kind of self-organizing group that emerged in the course of the preparation of a decade. And we're very happy that to have this excitement from the younger generation to really be at the table and be part of this design process for the decade. And this is something that we really saw very strongly in our first global planning meeting in 2009, where we really had the community and strong statement from those early career professionals to really be part of a development process. And I hope we've facilitated this as much as we could. And of course, this is not stopping here. We want the early career professionals to actively help us design specific actions for their communities. So Edward, over to you. Tell us a little bit more about capacity development and the role of early career ocean professionals in the decade. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Julian, to give the opportunity to present about how the early career will be involved during the ocean decade. And this we are going to see how they will be involved during the implementation. So my business of air carrier ocean professional to the UN Decade of Ocean. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So here will be the contents of my presentation. Sorry, can you go to the previous one? So the history of informal working group of ECOPS. Okay, so this will be the content of my presentation. So it will be the history of the informal working groups of air carrier ocean professionals. Also, I'll be presenting about the role of ECOPS in the ocean decade and what are the priorities that informal working group is working on. And lastly, I will present the importance of ocean decade to air carrier professionals in the Atlantic region for capacity building. Next slide, please. So the informal working group of ECOPS began when, after the United Nations General Assembly declared the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development in 2027. Then the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission tasked to prepare the implementation plan of the Ocean Decade. Then the IOC formed the Executive Planning Group task team for preparatory phase of the Ocean Decade. And this Executive Planning Group were tasked to prepare this implementation phase from 2028 to 2030. Next slide, please. So in May 2019, during the first global planning meeting, a self-organized group of ECOPS requested support from the IOC to establish an informal working group of ECOPS that would first identify the key needs, interests, and the contribution of ECOPS to the decade. Also, to engage ECOPS in the decade preparation phase, to incorporate ECOPS' contribution to the development of the decade implementation plan, and also to scope potential of ECOPS engagement strategies for the decade implementation phase. Next slide, please. So the establishment of informal working groups of ECOPS, the members who formed these informal working groups were nominated by executive planning groups and the secretariat. And initially, the member which formed the informal working group of ECOPS started with only 43 members. And among them, 45% were female and 46 out of them were male. The informal working group included diverse members from all over the world. As you can see from the right-hand side of my picture, you can see that this is an informal working group which comprises different ocean professions from different countries all over the world. And the age of these air carrier ocean professionals ranges between 20 years to about 35 years of age. Next slide, please. So what are the roles of ECOPS in the ocean decade? First of all, the ECOPS in the decades have been involved in decade preparation meetings. For example, the ECOPS have been involved in science action plan meetings, which was held in Washington, DC in November 2019. Also, the ECOPS have been involved in the second executive planning group meetings, which was held in Paris in January 2020. But all these ECOPS have been involved in all regional planning meetings. Apart from that, the air carrier ocean professionals also have been involved in contribution to shape the Ocean Decade implementation plan. And also they have been engaged in conferences and seminars at university levels. They have been also involved in establishment of informal working groups. Also they have been involved in different discussions with existing networks. In last year, when this ECOPS was established, they just launched a global survey to collect the views of ECOPS to incorporate in the implementation plan. And about 1,400 responses collected from more than 90 countries were collected by these air carrier professionals. And these responses were incorporated in the implementation plan. Next slide, please. So what are the priorities of the informal working group of ECOPS? First of all, the informal working groups of ECOPS, they are looking priorities for research and expertise, which will enable them to contribute as reviewers, to participate in regional and thematic meetings, and also to serve on panels and committees. But these ECOPS of informal working groups, they are also looking for knowledge exchange and mentorship from senior scientists. Nevertheless, the informal working group, they are also looking for opportunity for outreach and events, but also public engagement, like to communicate the values of Ocean Decade and also ocean science through networks in the regions. Next slide, please. Another priorities of which this informal working group they are looking on is to be the ambassadors of the Ocean Decade. In that sense, being the ambassador, they will be able to organize local events to support the Ocean Decade, but also they will be able to communicate materials of the Ocean Decade. And nevertheless, they will be also to participate, they'll be able to participate in decade events, for example, in different workshops or in different panels, like today, me, Edward, I'm a ocean professionals, and I have got an opportunity to participate in the panel of this high-level meeting. So this is the kind of the opportunity the informal working group of career professionals will be looking for during the Ocean Decade. Not only that, but the informal working group of the career ocean professionals will be looking to be linked with the stakeholders groups so that they can be able to share their expertise. And then also, they want to be linking with the science and the governance. Also, the ECOPS, they want to integrate in this coming Ocean Decade. Next slide, please. So what are the importance of the Ocean Decade to early career professionals living and working in the Atlantic region for capacity development? So this Ocean Decade is very important for these early career professionals in the Atlantic region because it will help them to get or to be involved in different mentorship programs. Also, it will enable them to grow professional in such a way that they will be able to be involved in global leadership fellowships, also to be engaged in multidisciplinary workshops, and also they will get the opportunity to participate in science for sustainable development crash courses. Not only that, but the early career ocean professions from the Atlantic Ocean, from Atlantic region, if they will get an opportunity to participate in Ocean Decade, they will be able to connect with senior scientists and different platforms so that they can share their experience and the knowledge they have on marine science perspective. But also they will be able to communicate their sciences, but also they will be able to join different networks which have objectives of marine sciences. And in that case, they will be able to develop their career in the field of marine. Yeah. Next slide, please. So on this last slide, the career professionals are also from the Atlantic region. They will get opportunities to engage and to be involved in the decade, but they will get the list of initiatives of how to get involved in the decade. They will get an opportunities for resources, for planning and development, and also they get coaching. And as I said before, they will be the ambassador of the Ocean Decade, and hence they will get the opportunity to know how to run special sessions and a conference. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this marks the end of my presentation. Thank you everyone for listening. And now I will hand over to Julian. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edward. And again, thank you for your leadership and the leadership of your groups in really, embedding this issue of early career professionals at the heart of a decade. And we really look forward to see some meaningful and concrete initiatives to come up at the action level in the coming weeks and months to support this engagement of early career professionals. So, dear colleagues, we have about 13 minutes left. Unfortunately we need to end on time for this event. But I would like to maybe take a few questions, and I see that some of you have been posting on the Q&A some questions that I would like to put to our panel. So let's try to take about 10 minutes to do that before we wrap up and close the event. So one of our first question I have here, and I think I will address that maybe to Alison, is how does the Decade of Ocean Science coordinates with the UN Decade on ecosystem restorations with regards to coastal ecosystems, in particular mangroves, which are critical for marine biodiversity? So indeed, we do have more than one decade, and it's important that those are complementary and are really mutually supporting each other. Alison, what's your take on this?
Yeah, thanks, Julian. It's a great question, and it's great to hear that people are aware of these 2 decades that are going on in parallel. We are in active contact with the United Nations Environment Programme and FAO, who are leading on the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and we're all in very strong agreement that this is an excellent opportunity to really show the links and the connections between science and action, where we're looking at ways that we can work together so that there are specific activities coming through the Ocean Decade, which is generating the science and the knowledge that can feed into discussions on how to do restoration, how to upscale restoration, how to manage restored areas, or how to make policy around restoration. There are so many opportunities to really develop a knowledge base and an evidence base that can be used throughout the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. We're also looking at ways that we can combine our forces around youth engagement, around community mobilization. The UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration has a very strong focus on youth and community mobilization, and that's an area where we certainly also want to look at how we can start talking to those communities and continue talking to those communities about the importance of ocean science. So I think there's a lot of excitement between the different groups working on these 2 decades, and I think it's an excellent opportunity, as I said, to connect the science and the action.
Great, thank you very much. Now let's move to another question, and maybe this is a question I would like to ask Mika Odido. How can we benefit from new ocean science if we lack infrastructures, funding, and young scientists? What's your take, Mika?
This is an issue that was discussed at length during the regional consultation workshop in Nairobi. And it's an issue that has also come up during previous engagements of the subcommission. Infrastructure and young scientists, both of them will depend on convincing the government and by inference the society that ocean sciences can be able to contribute to societal outcomes. We need to convince the youth that by taking ocean sciences as a career, they'll be able to get decent jobs, and they'll be able to contribute to the development of their society. And once we do this, once we convince the governments and the society that ocean sciences can contribute to sustainable development, the support will come from the governments. Because whether it is local funding or it is funding coming from outside, we have to address society needs. Of course, we've also discussed at length how expensive some of the infrastructure is. And on this, the issue of partnerships has kept coming up. Already we have significant partnerships within the region. The government of South Africa, for example, has been one of their bigger research vessels, the SA Galas 2, for 2 regional cruises. It's a fairly big vessel. It can take about 100 scientists and 50 crew. And the South African government covers the entire cost of the vessel. And what the experts from the other countries need to do is to get to the point of embarkation at the point of this embarkation. This is an excellent example of how infrastructure, which is expensive, can be used jointly. We also have different countries in the region teaming up to address common issues of concern and putting together their resources to address this. So I can summarize that the key issue, first of all, is addressing society needs. Then secondly, partnerships within the region and partnerships between regions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mika. I have a question for Christa. How do you see the role of innovation and entrepreneurship as a way of locally appropriating the science generated by the decade? And I guess a sub-question of that is, will the decade help to create jobs and new businesses in emerging economies? And basically, how can we move from science to welfare coastal communities?
Yeah, thank you for this question. And I think there's fantastic opportunity, because that is what the decade is focusing on, solutions. And with solutions comes, it comes technology, it comes services, and those will have to be, delivered. And through its delivery, that would hopefully create those jobs. Just this week, I participated in the most fascinating and inspiring workshop that took place in the United States and organized by early career ocean professionals and scientists, looking at those potential, discussing the technologies, and the convergence of technologies. And it's amazing, these technologies that are being available. I mean, I was just, blown away from, remote cameras going through the ocean to systems to transmit information between instruments. So they're really, and seeing this coming from, younger scientists, working with mature scientists that have done these amazing innovations like Bob Ballard. I think that's where it is. So I think these are the opportunities, and this is what we have to see, because if we want to have a sustainable, so what we reach in the decade is sustainable, it has to have that true complete value chain. So I think that, those early conversations, especially with those that are in those areas, with those industries, with those that would be integrating, with those governments that would be integrating, is really key. Don't wait for the end to see how your technologies is going to be applied. Sit down with those first, and you can start and you can continue to develop them. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Now let me ask a question maybe to Edward. How can the decade facilitate virtual research by, for example, getting different communities to work together on specific topics? Do you have any ideas on how this could take place?
Yeah.
I think you're breaking out a little bit, Edward.
I can focus basically on three important areas of which Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, probably better without the video, I think.
Sure. Yeah. I think the decade can support mainly, I think, in two areas. For example, for ocean, for decade for ocean professionals. And this, I think, the decade can encourage collaborations between the early career professionals. And this will enable these early career professionals to team up together, and they will be able to share their scientific knowledge and capacity during the implementation of the decade. But another area which I think is important, the decade can support them in terms of innovation. As Mika said, there should be an establishment of university-based innovation center, where these ECOPs and other communities can get an opportunity to be involved in those innovations and get the skills which in turn can be a solution oriented to solve the problems related in marine innovation.
Great, thank you very much. And then I have one last question, which anyone is allowed to go for, or just one or two answers will probably do given the time, is how can the decade really accelerate and strengthen local initiatives? How do we get this big UN initiative to really matter for local communities, and what can be the way, and how can they contribute? Anyone would like to step in?
Yeah, well, I would just like to say that ocean literacy is going to be key. And I think this involvement at the local community level is essential, because if we see a movement like Black Lives Matter, that is where when the society feels empowered and they feel that they really have something at stake, they will activate and they will be involved. So I think it's, we really have to take and talk to those groups and talk to these local communities, these shipping communities, maritime community, and coastal communities, and see, how we can most effectively be able to share our knowledge with them so that it is, relevant once again. And that will be done, of course, a lot through national stakeholders. So I think that was something that, it really takes that local approach, and communication is going to be a key aspect of how we're able to communicate our science and make it relative to the local communities.
Very good. And in that sense, I really encourage all of you to work with the people in your country to really set up national coordinating committees for the decade and really get the dialogue. And this is not just committees for bureaucrats in ministries. It's really committees where we should have different group of stakeholders at the table who can really help and co-design those actions. I think this is probably all we have time for. So I want to thank our panelists before we wrap up. My duty is to give you a bit of an update on the forthcoming call for decade actions that Alison mentioned in her presentation. So this is the first call for the decade actions, which will be issued on the 15th of October. This call will be open for 3 months to really give sufficient time to the different communities out there to think about their applications and what kind of programs they want to put forward. The focus here is really on global and major regional programs, which are, of course, multi-countries, multi-year, large-scale, addressing one or several of the decade challenges and societal outcomes. It is also for institutions and organizations that are also willing to support the coordination of a decade, either through in-kind support. We've talked about, for example, the role of decade collaborative centers that we would like to establish. And for that, of course, we need the partnership of different organizations to take leadership in those areas. So this call will be open, as I said, for a few months. The decision of endorsement will only be taken in early 2021 once we have a decade governance elements put in place. But of course, there are already some information available on our website. You can download the different guidance note for applicants, and there will be an online submission form which will be active from the 15th of October again. We are planning a couple of Q&A sessions to try to answer very concrete questions that you might have as a proponent of such action. And of course, at the same time, we are also encouraging other UN entities to come forward with their actions, whether it is in the area of food security or navigation or marine conservation, for example. So again, I really invite you to check out the oceandecade.org website. Sign up, and then you will also receive some information on the process. We also have a series of decade webinars which we launched at the end of September, so I invite you to follow those. I think the next one is going to be focusing on small island developing states. So this conversation is only starting, but of course we now also want to move from conversation to action. So we really rely on all of you to play an active role for this decade, which belongs to everybody. So with this, let me again thank our great panelists for their contribution today. Thank you, the audience, for taking the time to listen and engage in this event. I want to, in particular, thank the AIR Center and the Penn State Alliance for Education, Science, Engineering, and Design with Africa, and in particular, Craig Jenkins, who is the director of Penn State's ACEDA. Let me also highlight that if you have time and if you're still interested to continue this discussion, you can stay online. I believe there is a Zoom link which is available in the chat box, and you can join that virtual room to continue the discussion. And from our side here at the IOC, we thank you very much, and we look forward to see you soon. Keep safe and keep engaged in the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. Thank you very much.